Well, welcome to today's episode of The Visible Workplace. Thanks for joining us. This is our third episode, and I hope you're getting a lot of value from this. If you haven't already, go back and catch the first two episodes. We covered some really cool stuff and looking forward to an interesting topic today. Annabel, welcome to the call. How are you going?
Thank you, Tom. I am wonderful. I'm feeling very relaxed. I know you were just about to introduce the topic, which is stress in the workplace. So I'm feeling the exact opposite of stress in the workplace today. This is my day off with our youngest child, Claudia. So I am feeling very zen and stress-free, but very excited and eager to talk about the topic of stress in the workplace. And I don't know what to say if this doesn't resonate with everybody listening. If you have worked in any sort of job, you should be interested in this topic. You will have definitely felt some of the symptoms that we'll talk about and potentially tried to alleviate them. But it's a big one. It's a big problem.
I agree. I 100%. I'd be amazed if someone, if you are listening and you have not experienced stress in the workplace, then please send us a message and say, hey, just want to let you know, we have it dialed in.
Yeah. Tell us the secret to a stress-free workplace.
I've seen it where there's generalized kind of low levels to medium levels of stress. But certainly this can go right off the deep end for some workplaces where the stress in the workplace becomes extremely toxic, and we start seeing many downstream effects of that stress as people perhaps aren't coping so well, they're not coming in, they don't know how to talk about the problems may not be seen, maybe management or business owner doesn't know what to do with the situation, and suddenly it's this giant mess.
Yeah, it's sort of a feeling of loss of control. And I suppose no matter what job you're in, jobs can be obviously so varied in the nature of the role. So far to date, I'm now 40 years old, just turned 40, but I've been a professional, or I am a professional golfer, so I've played golf tournaments. So that's one type of stress. That's not a workplace, but it's still a very stress inducing environment. It's performance pressure. And then I've been on television, another type of stress. Now, there is a workplace involved there, and there's a lot of moving parts with directors and producers. So you are the show. The pressure is on you. And I know that sort of stress of this feeling of you cannot let all of these moving parts and all of these people down by not performing, and especially with live television. So there's that sort of stress, which I'd love to talk a little bit about. And then, of course, that it brings me to the now, and I'm a psychologist in much more of what all the listeners would know as a normal sort of workplace, with the hierarchy and the managerial system and everything, all the employees as well. But I suppose, Tom, I'd love to kick off. And just a quick story about just to talk about the different type of stress and how it can come out differently. Certainly the nervous system and the physical symptoms. When I think back to being on television, I was a host on Golf Channel, which is a 24-hour golf network. It goes out globally. So it's a very big stage that you're on, and a very professional setting, huge studios in Orlando at the time. They're now in Connecticut. But even the environment made you feel stressed. But so talking about live television, you do know what you're going to say, and there's a lot of preparation that goes into that. So one of the things that I remember about my stress with this role was that the day before I would go on camera, we'll have prepped for probably 3 days. I'd go to bed that night and the ruminating would begin, going over and over and over the lines that I need to remember. And they're quite extensive, that we're talking about a couple of hours of a live show and then a couple of hours in the day doing other shooting for ads or the morning show or something like that. And the whole night would just be tossing and turning, tossing and turning. So, from a medical perspective, what is happening to my body that I can't shut it down? This is a stress.
It's certainly not conducive to high performance. The idea of not getting a good night's sleep and then having to show up and do the show, ideally you would be able to relax, go to sleep really well, show up, and everything just runs smoothly. But with that environment that you're talking about, and you're the one on camera, then it's very easy for the mind to begin to worry. What could happen? What would it look like? What are the impacts? What am I fearful of? If I make a mistake, will I get fired? Will people wonder and say, gee, not very professional? All of these fears are coming up, and that's having done the preparation as well. 3 days of preparation coming in, and then suddenly you're having to show up and perform. Medically, I think that you're likely to have a significant adrenal response, that there's going to be too much adrenaline running around, preventing sleep. Most likely, in my experience, I would think that I do actually sleep, even when it seems like I am not sleeping at all. But still, it's not ideal. And this is sort of very relevant to high performance stress. The one analogy that I have for this is the final exams for becoming a general practitioner. And this was essentially, this was essentially 12 months of study. And then you show up and you've got this 4 hours of taking question after question after question. And the night before that, definitely did not sleep well. Not ideal. And yet showed up, and I virtually every time I have this bizarre experience of taking exams where my mind goes completely blank about 10 minutes before the exam. And I'm like, oh no, I can't remember.
Everything's gone.
Everything is gone. And
I wonder what that is.
And I got used to it. What was that?
Do you know what that is? Do you have no idea? It's just something that happens.
I think possibly it's some kind of, I don't know, if we're going to give a computer analogy, it wipes the slate clean, and then you've got a clean access to the data. As soon as that first question comes, it's now a prompt for a clean whiteboard, instead of having a whiteboard covered in data, and it wipes it. And then the first question comes, what would you do in this situation? And out comes the correct answers. But we're talking 12 months of work, high stakes, it's quite expensive. And then what I forgot about is that you get through the first 2 exams, and then there's another one in about 3 months' time. And I was so happy to get through this first one that I then took 3 weeks off completely, and then sort of woke up and went, I've got to sit more exams. And the stress of this, I got through, it was fine, but it isn't the most pleasant experience. And I think that if people have maladaptive stress responses, let's call them maladaptive. Let's say that I was so worried by my lack of sleep that I didn't go to the exam. Didn't go. I'm just like, you know what? I'm so stressed. I don't think I can do this. Yes. And I walk away from that exam. That's not a great outcome. And I've allowed the stress of the moment to overcome my actual result that I want, which is to pass my exams. And to pass the exams, I have to show up. Even if haven't slept, child was up all night, whatever the situation is, I have no chance of passing that exam if I don't show up. And then the problem that I think people face is next time around, even if they're more prepared and even if they get a good night's sleep, that stress response kicks in, and it's very easy then to set up an established pattern of, I'm fearful of what the outcome could be, and I'm not willing to have that poor outcome, so I'm not going to go through the experience.
The default kicks in. I've stepped away from facing the fear of sitting the exam before, therefore, I'll do it again. And they get sort of trapped in this they have this mindset of, when I'm faced with something, I just run away rather than facing the music, so to speak. And I suppose people that do that and have the maladaptive strategies probably can't do high performance jobs, and they simply refuse to, which kind of brings us down from high performance to your more average office job, which is a different stress altogether. It's probably not that really heightened, I can't sleep at night, but more of a simmering, dysregulated nervous system, and overstimulated during the day, able to turn it off at night, but don't know how to self-soothe, and possibly quiet quitting occurs, because that's sort of, quiet quitting is putting in the absolute minimum amount of effort to keep their jobs. They're not going the extra mile for their employer, and this might be caused by stress. It could be other things as well, but seeing as we're talking about stress, I think it might be, we could link quiet quitting with stress, and it could be an attempt by workers to sort of regain some sort of control over their lives, and avoid talking about, the not facing the music, but avoiding stress or anxiety in their job.
I can see how that could be set up, very much so. So let's say that you're living in Australia, which is an extraordinarily expensive country, and you can't live on Social Security for whatever reason. You have to work, but there's this unspoken stress that you're dealing with, and you don't really know how to solve it, not really sure even what it is, but there's a safety in going to the lowest performance, or an apparent safety.
Oh, it's a coping mechanism.
Coping mechanism, yeah.
I think also, you touched on that they don't understand. I don't know if most of the population do understand, how dysregulated their nervous system is. I remember back to when I was an amateur golfer, an elite amateur golfer, and you'd be talking to other professionals, or even mental coaches, psychologists, sports psychologists, and about nerves and how to combat them. And to me, there was always this deep breathing, and there was often no explanation about why are we doing deep breathing. And I'd get on the first tee nerves, and I'd start this deep breathing, and cognitively my thoughts would jump to, my God, my breathing is so out of whack. It's shallow, it's faster. Like, why am I concentrating on the physical symptoms that are, telling my mind, it's kind of leading to more panic. And there was, and more judgment would pile on, my own judgment of myself about how I'm doing it wrong. But there was never any explanation. So it's kind of coming back to, if people don't understand why you would do something to combat it, or even what it is in the first place, how can anything improve? So it wasn't until actually really recently, when I was doing a master of psychology, professional psychology, when I learned about the nervous system, and I think it's correct me if I'm wrong, the parasympathetic nervous system, and it slows your breathing rate down. So this isn't a cognitive tool. It's actually a a physical thing. So your breathing is it's your, I think it's controlled by the automatic nervous system, and that is what causes, you know, some blood vessels to widen, and the whole thing slows down. But without knowing that, I was thinking that it was just a cognitive thing. So now after all these years I actually ditched the focusing on the breathing because it made me worse, made me feel more panicked. But now I'm bringing it back in because now I know that it's an involuntary thing rather than something that I thought I was supposed to control it with my mind.
Because you weren't explained why
No.
you would focus on your breathing.
No,
Yeah,
there was
really
no
interesting.
explanation, and there should be explanations in workplaces. Would it be helpful if people knew why we're always told to focus on deep breathing? I mean, if you Google it, you know, what do I do when I'm stressed in the workplace? I'm sure the number one hit is going to be do some deep breathing. You know, but if you don't
Well, it
know
takes
why,
the mind off whatever you're focused on, onto the breathing. As you said, it brings awareness to how you are breathing right now. It's essentially a type of meditation. It's a single point of focus. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Even if you're not doing the words, it's like I'm slow breathing in, slow breathing out. It's activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So for those of you who aren't medical, we've got two autonomic branches of the nervous, so two branches of the autonomic nervous system. One is called sympathetic, fight, flight, freeze is usually that one. I'm going to fight. I've got to defend myself. I can't. I'm going to run. Get me the heck out of here. Or I'm going to freeze and do nothing and hope that the threat passes and doesn't recognize. So that's all sympathetic. That all will shut down your ability to think logically or rationally interpret the situation. You're now running on emotional experience of life. And this tends to lead to poor decision-making, increased feelings of stress, mistakes, all of that comes. Parasympathetic on the other side is a rest and digest system, slows the heart rate, slows the breathing. It's much more chilled, kicking back on a Sunday afternoon in the hammock. And our society is very much designed towards the sympathetic. We don't have very many practices that are explicitly saying, hey, this is a parasympathetic exercise. The slow, deep breathing is a parasympathetic exercise. It's working the parasympathetic nervous system. And my major form of this, my personal choice when I'm going through extreme periods of stress or even just regular stress, is a particular meditation that I was first introduced to in 2007. And it's called Turtle Longevity Qigong First Form. Very long name. It's a pretty simple meditation. It's got 3 movements and 2 visualizations. You become a turtle and swim between islands. But this is an explicit exercise of parasympathetic nervous system. And it's wonderfully rich and very, very wonderful meditation. You can check it out on YouTube. But this balances out the stress that many of us are going through between work, but also maybe at home. Like I think at least in Australia, and from what I understand, generally across the world, post-COVID, we've been going through large amounts of inflation, rental crisis, interest rates going up. So not very few people have been able to avoid home stress, then work stress. And it's like, this is a very stressful environment.
So, Tom, with a meditation as the one you've just spoken about, the turtle meditation, that's something that you could introduce at home, I would imagine. Would that impact at all the working day, the next day, like on a more holistic, sort of way to relax the mind? Or what would you suggest for while people are actually at work? They're not necessarily going to be able to take 10, 20 minutes out, whatever, doing certain things in a work office environment. Is it the deep breathing, or is there something else? I love to hear that for something perhaps at home, but what about for at work? Because we
Well,
don't want people to quiet quitting, right?
all right, so a couple of things. One, I find it extremely difficult to get through the day if I haven't done meditation. To me, even 5 minutes per day is a vast return on investment for what I'm about to face in that day.
You do it in
That
the morning?
I do it in the morning. I will do it in the morning, and then depending on how the day's going, I will add in a lunchtime meditation anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. And the fact that it's not appropriate in the workplace to do a meditation is more a representation of our unawareness of the benefits, because it's highly likely that if I'm struggling, stressed, had a very difficult morning, and I just rush through my food and get back to the work, that my ability to perform at a high level is decreased. And
So perhaps a
yeah,
culture change, a
culture, yeah.
workplace culture change, accepting timeouts for meditation or whatever's necessary. A brief walk around outside, get some fresh air,
Brief, yep.
get a change up from the monotony of the workplace.
Absolutely. I think the return on investment for the lunchtime meditation is extremely high. Extremely high. And to have that maybe formally introduced by a workplace, hey, that's wonderful. But if it's not accepted, then hey, I'm going to have to take some of my time and say, this is important. And there's many, many, many different forms of meditation that someone could use. But the benefits are going to decrease stress, turn off the emotional response, allow the neocortex to start working again, increase productivity, increase focus. But the options, you asked about options. So one is you can do the breathing exercise. Just inhale, exhale, deep breathe in. It's pretty simple. You can use a form of meditation called mantra, where you're repeating a word such as relax or love or happy or some kind of word just over and
Internally,
over
just
and
thinking the
over.
word. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's called mantra. You can have guided visualizations where you just will plug in headphones, and instead of going to music or a podcast or whatever, you pop on a guided meditation for 10 minutes. And that will take you through various things. You could go, so they could take you to, on all sorts of journeys, or it could just be, hey, listening to a background sound such as rain falling. But all of these methods are basically regenerating, to my mind, regenerating focus, regenerating energy, regenerating the ability to then work at a higher level in the afternoon. And then hopefully I'm done and I can go home and not take the stress with me. I can then be with my family, I can hang out, and this is extremely difficult in our current technological world. But nonetheless, to me, a lunchtime meditation is extremely valuable for a stressed person.
Well, and sometimes we may not even recognize that we are a little bit stressed and we are a little bit overstimulated. I've had this experience myself quite recently where I was talking to a colleague, another psychologist, and I was telling her that sometimes I feel like I'm going in fast forward. And we're talking about, being overstimulated, and really, I've always struggled to self-soothe. I probably haven't practiced meditation, or even if it's a yoga class, or all of these techniques you've just spoken about enough just over the years. I've just got into a habit of go, 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 push, push, push. And I think part of that comes from my personality, maybe my background in elite sport, but it's always just been in my head. Instead of the mantra being relax, 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 it's been push, 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 and we were talking about, what does my day look like, my routine, and we figured out that, I have my husband and I have 3 kids under 5. I go to the gym 6 days a week. In those 6 days a week at the gym, they're HIIT classes. They're not yoga. They're HIIT classes where the music is loud. You're doing a lot of cardio. You're going boom, 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 boom. Start a 9-hour work day, come home and do some more work on the computer, other requirements that I have with APRA, the governing body for psychologists, and it goes on and on. Then the screen sort of always does something to my brain. Now I'm ready to decompress, but my brain says, no, you're not. So now it's 9:30 or 10 p.m. and I feel I'm ready to go. So all of these things that I'm saying, eventually I'll have like a really nice hot shower and try and bring myself down. This is self-soothing. But it wasn't until this conversation that I had recently with this colleague where I realized I am overstimulated and this is possibly some level of stress. I just haven't viewed it like that. And here I am, a psychologist. I thought to myself, I should know better. But I'm now going to actively start bringing in some meditation because I realize that I never bring myself down, and I pretty much don't know how to. So, that's one sort of extreme, that some people, that might resonate with some people. Something else that I wanted to talk about briefly, which I thought is a really interesting statistic, which is kind of the opposite to how my life is with my work. I'm, obviously go, go, go. But for other people, it's the other way. And I was looking at some research, and would you believe, Tom, that the average office worker in Australia, their productivity level is less than 3 hours in an average 8-hour working day?
I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah. So in all career fields, the average worker for productivity is 60% or less each day. But for office workers, that percentage drops drastically. So, I suppose, my example is a version of stress. But then I think coming back to what I was talking about at the beginning, there's other people that are running from stress. And this could possibly be, their form of a coping mechanism of doing as little as they can, which is, kind of tying into that whole theory of quiet quitting.
So, yeah, I mean, do people explicitly set out to have a relatively unproductive day? Probably not, but let's assume that people aren't going to aim for a 3-hour day, but why is that happening? And to me, it could be the stress of the work is there, and it is there, and let's say that I'm fearful of whether am I doing the job correctly? Am I doing the job incorrectly? Am I doing it the right way? Is this the standard? Will I get yelled at? Like all of these subconscious thoughts, very different to push, 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 but oh my goodness, I'm not sure. Am I doing it the right way? So I can tiptoe through the work and perhaps get more feedback that I'm on the right track by potentially, if someone's quite empathic, looking at what's going on, sending it to the boss, asking for feedback. But the underlying problem is that they're not really sure, am I doing the right job? This is a significant problem. I actually had this experience, not in the workplace, but a complete memory loss of what I was meant to do. Had to go and buy, my wife's like, hey, can you go and grab a couple more t-shirts for the kids? We're going back to school, we need some t-shirts. And I just gapped on it entirely. And I'm like, what's going on here? This is ridiculous. This is not a difficult task. But previously, where I had not been clear on the results and had delivered the incorrect results, and then that didn't go very well. You know, it's like, hey, you wasted money, you stuffed it up or whatever. Now I've got a memory that's coming up that's blocking me from doing something that I'm perfectly capable of. But I get down there, had the list in my pocket, drove all the way down. It's about a half hour, drove all the way back, walked in the door, pulled the list out and went, man, that is some weird stuff.
Yeah.
And it's I was unconscious to it, and I didn't put enough work into defining the trip, and that may all be part of the stress response. I'm going to benefit by avoiding the risk of doing this incorrectly by not doing it at all.
Yeah, it's an avoidance tactic. I think we've all been in a workplace where we've witnessed somebody that is appearing to be ever so relaxed, doing things ever so slowly, talking a lot to other colleagues. You know, these are all avoidance tactics. And it's, you know, more than likely, I mean, you'd have to obviously you'd have to investigate the person and the scenario. But in my mind, there's a fairly high chance that that person is in fact stressed and going through, you know, exactly all of those things you've spoken about, you know, possibly, you know, racing mind and thinking, I don't know how to do this. So the default is, well, if I can't do the job properly, I'm just going to, you know, act as if I'm doing it slowly, or something like that is going on to that effect of, you know, and I think that's why this 3-hour productivity situation, well, it's one of the reasons, you know, it could be so low, because it's astonishingly low, 3 hours out of an 8-hour day. So, you know, I think that, you know, stress is, you know, it's just an incredibly impacting and sort of debilitating symptom in the workplace. And I mean, I think it's a logical step to sort of push towards that culture change in, you know, we're accepting of meditation, walks out in green spaces, whatever it is you need to do to come back and be able to concentrate and not, you know, not forget to get the t-shirts, the one thing you went for. You know, I guess, yeah, that's sort of, I think it's such a crippling thing in the workplace.
Well, I think also one of the other takeaways is when things do go wrong, which is pretty common, who's at fault? Is it the person, or is it the structure that people are using to get work done? And when it's the person, then I feel like the possibility of setting up maladaptive coping mechanisms is much, much higher than, let's say that we could have a look at, hey, what happened, and talk me through this. And okay, I can say you made this decision here. What were you thinking? Okay, cool. What do we need to change? And instead of it being the person's fault, it's okay, this is the process's fault. This is the process that we need to change or adapt. Now, that brings up a whole host of other problems, but nonetheless, the point is, when the person is made to be the fault, it's really a high probability of ongoing stress in the workplace gets set up.
Yes, I totally agree that when it's the person that feels they're at fault or is made to feel they're at fault, it's incredibly disabling. You know, hopefully we can talk further down the track in other episodes about how, you know, systems can help people and assist people, you know, so that they're not forever having to rely on asking their manager or their boss what to do, because that's that sort of chicken and egg scenario and that's troublesome in itself. And hopefully one day in the future, there will be software that has all of that in place so that the workplace, I don't know, it's just an easier kind of has easier systems to navigate.
And I think, yeah, I mean, a less stressed worker, a less stressed owner, a less stressed manager, these are all beneficial for getting more done in a clean way that leads to better businesses and a better society. So this stress problem, where we've come to the end of our episode, it's kind of flown by, but this stress problem is very endemic across workplaces, across disciplines in various businesses. It's certainly not one particular type of business that has it, but it is something that we as people really need to be aware of, and coping mechanisms or prevention mechanisms like meditation, but also, hey, how are we going to deal with this? So. All right, Anna, that brings us pretty much to the end. Any concluding comments for today's episode?
Yes, my concluding comment is that I'm going to stick with my commitment to meditate daily, even if it's in the form of yoga. That's probably an easy entry thing for me. But for everyone listening, whether it's yoga, whether it's deep breathing, or whether it's turtle qigong, did I get that right?
Yeah, first form.
Yeah, first form is qigong. Yeah, just look into something and yeah, look after yourselves.
I think is wonderful advice. All right, thank you, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you've enjoyed this episode and you haven't already, then hit the subscribe button. If you know someone who would benefit from this episode, then please share it up. Annabel, that brings us to the end of episode number 3 for The Visible Workplace. Thanks so much for joining me. Look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, Tom. Me too.